We have some more NHL signings to discuss today, as well as several trade rumors concerning the remaining restricted free agents, many of which who do not have arbitration rights. And we're also looking at some UFA news as well, with some teams announcing some injuries. They might have some more cap space than they might have been planning on. We'll discuss all the latest news and rumors coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. Now, as I mentioned, we have a variety of news and rumors to talk about here. Before we jump into the restricted and unrestricted free agent rumor mill, let's take a look at a couple of quick notes here from signings around the NHL. A pretty significant RFA signing took place earlier today, with the New York Islanders coming to terms with one of their top defensemen, Ryan Pulock, on a 2-year deal with an average annual value at $5 million. Now, this is very much a backloaded contract. His salary in year 2 is almost double what it is in year 1. It's the maximum allowable differential between the 2 years as well. So obviously he'll make a little over $3 million in year 1, a little over $6 million in year 2, $10 million total, for an average annual value of $5 million. So, of course, this will walk him directly to unrestricted free agency. So Pulock will be a fairly young UFA when this is all said and done. We'll see what they can do. Obviously, because of their cap situation, it was kind of difficult for them to really lock him up much longer and push that AAV up even higher. So now the New York Islanders are done with all of their RFAs that have arbitration rights. Of course, they still have the big one out there, Matthew Barzal. But of course, he's not have enough NHL seniority yet to get the arbitration rights on his contract. So right now, that's not something we're going to see. That could drag on for some time. But really, for the New York Islanders, because their RFAs who have filed for arbitration are all now looked after, they do get a second buyout window. So they'll have that starting here in 48 hours. And then they'll have 24 hours to decide if they're going to take advantage and use it or not. The other stipulation with this buyout window as well is it has to be a contract of $4 million or more. So there's kind of limited on who they can buy out. But typically cheaper contracts, there's not as much incentive to do that anyway. But if you take a look around at some of the guys on their team that would be, your prime suspects, I guess, that they would probably like to move on from. You're looking at guys like Johnny Boychuk or Andrew Ladd. They're probably not going to be using it on those players. And the reason is there's just not enough cap savings. I mean, if you take a look at Johnny Boychuk, for example, his cap hit is $6 million, and they would only save around $800,000. So they'd still have a pretty substantial cap hit. And of course, they'd be tied to him for 4 more years instead of 2. So it's not going to give them a whole lot of extra space. So it just doesn't really make sense in my opinion now. The same with the Andrew Ladd contract. That's also has a lot of bonuses built into it. So the cap savings on a buyout is really not all that significant. Ladd has 3 years left at $5.5 million, and a buyout for next year would only save them about $600,000. So they're not really getting away with a whole lot. And of course, they'd be tied to that contract for 6 years instead of 3. Now, with Andrew Ladd, there's still some talk that maybe he's not going to be completely healthy and ready to play this year. So he could be a potential long-term injury reserve candidate. If that's the case, that could be a major help to finding them enough cap space to look after Barzal and kind of get themselves out of cap jail, but they still wouldn't have a lot of wiggle room because right now the rumor is that Lou Lamoriello would really like to get Barzal signed around $7.5 million, but ideally I believe Barzal and his agent are probably looking at somewhere closer to $9 million, preferably on a longer term deal. They might take something closer to that 7.5 mark on a short term contract, but it's not really something that I suspect, at least at this point, that the Barzal camp would be willing to entertain. Now, the other concerning part about this as well is Barzal, I think it was last year, had indicated he was hoping another RFA would accept an offer sheet, be fun to shake things up with the league. Seemed like he was very much open to it himself. At least that's just kind of the vibe he gave off. I mean, he didn't come out and openly say that he would do it. It just, based on what he was saying, that's the vibe he gave off, and I guess it kind of concerned some people. Now, of course, that leaves the Islanders with a very limited amount of cap space and not nearly enough to get his contract satisfied. So they now have $3.9 million in cap space. And like I said, even if they get him at 7.5, which I think is a little bit low, that still leaves them $4 million shy. So obviously they can't buy out Boychuk, they can't buy out Ladd. The only real option for me for a buyout that kind of makes sense is defenseman Nick Leddy. Now, Leddy's contract is substantial enough that he would qualify to be bought out, and they would actually save $4.25 million in the first year, so the year coming up, and then $4.75 the year after. Of course, they'd have an extra couple of years of dead cap space, but they would get the most bang for their buck on that kind of buyout. So to me, if they do use the buyout, Nick Leddy is the most likely candidate just because of the savings. I mean, there's no point in buying out a Ladd or a Boychuk contract and be tied to it for a substantial period of time for a minimal amount of savings. Doesn't make sense. Now, of course, the Islanders would know much more about the health of Andrew Ladd than we currently know here today. I don't have reason to believe that he would for sure go on long-term injury reserve, but of course that would be a game changer. I guess they're going to have to kind of have a better idea about that. If they think they'll be able to use LTIR, then maybe they don't use the buyout. I know they would obviously prefer to make a trade. There's been a lot of talk really since the season kind of got into the focal point of the offseason here, going into the draft as well as into the free agent season, that there was a lot of talk about Johnny Boychuk being moved. At one point, we were led to believe a deal was really close, but it's not happened, so that would be a $6 million savings. Of course, depending on what else they had to give up or what was coming back, maybe not a full six, but either way, significant savings. That's never come to be. There's been a lot of talk about Leo Komarov being available. But again, in a flat cap world, there's not a lot of options out there. They're not the only team in this boat. There's other teams that are over the cap and need to find space, and other teams with big RFAs that we're going to talk about here a little bit later that are in the same predicament. So it's not an easy boat to be in right now. So you can't help but wonder if an offer sheet could come out. We've talked a lot about New Jersey being that prime team who was, if there anybody's going to do one this year, it would be the Devils. I mean, they've said enough here between what we learned from Mike Fuda and based on his GM interview that he leaked, which probably wasn't a great idea, but the fact is he did say it. So we kind of know this information to come from him, that the Devils would love to do an offer sheet. Of course, whether it be Barzal, Sorelli, Sergachev, I'm not sure that Barzal's the prime player for them to go after, but at the end of the day, I'm not sure what they're going to do here. But the Islanders are really in an awkward predicament. And making a trade, it's just not easy. They might end up having to trade a player that they really don't want to. The same with other East Coast team here, Tampa, who's in a similar boat with their RFAs, which we'll talk about here in a minute. But still, that's some pretty substantial signing for Ryan Pulock. It's a good deal. I think it's a fair deal. It's concerning that he goes right to being a UFA. Would have been nice to get him locked up a little bit longer, considering his importance. But at the same time, I understand they couldn't push that any further and drive that AAV up any higher. So we'll see what happens, but do you think there's a chance here that they're going to use this buyout? Do you think Nick Leddy makes the most sense based on actual savings? Or can they actually pull off a trade ahead of time here and move one of these other contracts that they'd like to get off their books to create the necessary space? One other quick signing as well, the Ottawa Senators did come to terms with RFA defenseman Christian Jaros on a one-year, two-way deal. I mentioned before, probably last week sometime, it looked like they were coming to terms on a deal, but it wasn't yet made official. He gets league minimum at the NHL, but the thing he was pushing for through arbitration, which they've since agreed to and avoided arbitration, was a bigger American Hockey League salary. He's actually going to be getting a pretty substantial amount, $250,000 at the AHL level. So that's a pretty good contract for him. Gives him another year to see what he can do here. A couple years back under Guy Boucher, Jaros was a pretty regular in the NHL lineup at the Senators. But then under DJ Smith, he spent pretty well most of the year at the AHL level. And I'm not sure with the guys they brought in that there's really a spot for him anymore either. So I think Jaros will likely be an American Hockey League defenseman as a potential call-up option depending on injuries. Now, we've also seen some more significant injury announcements coming today. One big one from the Columbus Blue Jackets announcing that forward Gustav Nyquist had to have shoulder surgery. He's going to be out for about 5 or 6 months. So that's unfortunate for him. Obviously, the Jackets are already in a pretty decent cap situation. They do need to sign Pierre-Luc Dubois, who had a really solid couple of years recently to get a long-term big money contract if they were willing to do it. He's certainly proven himself at this point to be their top center. He's young, still improving, only going to get better. Wouldn't be shocking if they do come to terms on a long-term contract, but I can certainly also see a scenario unfold that they might do something shorter term, which might be more preferable for Dubois as well, so he can really cash in a few years' time when the NHL's in a better financial situation and he's even more established and hopefully even built himself up even more to be a stronger player and deserve a bigger raise. So I guess we'll see what happens on that front. But with the extra salary potential relief here that they can get from a guy like Nyquist, and knowing that he is going to be out of the lineup for at least the first couple months of the season, you would think that would put the pressure to kind of go after a guy like Mike Hoffman or Granlund or one of these other free agents that are able to put the puck in the net because they need some more offense. They already needed offense, and then to be without one of their more offensive top six forwards in Nyquist, it's certainly going to hurt. So I can't help but wonder if we'll see them really push the offer to Hoffman, maybe offer a little bit more money to get that deal done and get him signed. I know this has been reported many times that they're certainly one of the teams that are in the mix. We've seen them clear out enough cap space heading into free agency that you knew they were poised to do a bigger move and that it was likely going to be adding a top scorer. They had considered even moving a goaltender if they had to as well. That never happened, so that's still a possibility. Maybe they go the trade route instead of free agency. Difficult to say, but if they can grab Mike Hoffman on a one-year deal, to me that would make a lot of sense. But I guess we'll see. Either way, Nyquist being out long-term is bad news for them on a team who could certainly use some more scoring instead of losing more. Now, the Dallas Stars were the other team who had additional injury updates today. We already found out about Tyler Seguin, but they've also confirmed that Ben Bishop also had to have a surgery and is going to be out for an extended period of time as well, about the same amount of time. So obviously Nyquist, Seguin, and Ben are all like 5 to 6 month time frames. So obviously it's really good for Dallas that they got Hudobin signed up for a 3-year deal. So both him and Bishop's contracts will expire at the same time. Obviously, he's shown that he can play a heavy workload, bigger than he ever has before in the NHL, and took them all the way to the finals. So if they get the same kind of play out of Hudobin moving forward, they should be in just fine shape. But at the end of the day, I'm not sure what these Stars will do. They'll likely go with their youngster, Jake Ottinger, as the backup. And then they'll have to, obviously, maybe sign another depth piece for their minor league system, perhaps. But either way, with Bishop being out for an extended time, that will give Hudobin an extended look in the regular season. Should also give more of an opportunity for Ottinger. And I said before, I couldn't help but wonder if, the fact of Hudobin playing as well as he did, and Ottinger starting to get a little bit more experience, maybe they could look to move Bishop. I mean, Bishop's been a guy, same thing when he was in Tampa, even before that to a degree in his brief time in St. Louis, Ottawa. Like, he is a great goaltender, but he cannot stay healthy, and he's always seems to be hurt at the most opportune, important games. So, if I'm Dallas and I'm looking at his contract, I'd probably find a way to move that if you're able to. I mean, I'm not going to be able to do it anytime soon, but, whether it be during the season once he returns or maybe next offseason, I don't know. But I would be comfortable, if I were them, riding with Hudobin as the starter. I mean, a lot of people look at Hudobin as being an older goaltender, and he certainly is. He's not a young spring chicken by any means, but he's only 1 year older than Bishop. So really, if you want to give Ottinger an opportunity, if he shows, especially in the first half of the season while Bishop's out, that he can play and do half decent, if he has a good showing there, then I would certainly consider a Bishop trade later on once he's healthy and once he's had a chance to come back and showcase him for sure. Now, the other team we're going to look at today as well, one of the other ones at least, is Tampa. They're down to $2.9 million in salary cap space, and they have to sign Anthony Cirelli, Mikhail Sergachev, and Eric Chernak. So obviously, they have a team full of no trade clauses, and they're still, to this day, having a difficult time moving them. And you can't help but wonder, like I said about the Islanders, that will a team swoop in here and offer sheet them? Because out of all these players, like looking at, they have to move one or two forwards. They have no choice in the matter, and you're not moving Stamkos, you're not moving Kucherov, you're not moving Yanni Gord, you're not moving Andre Palat. Then you have Johnson and Killorn, which are probably the more likely guys to go, but Johnson has a full no trade, Killorn has a modified no trade, and none of these players that they've given all these no trades to are showing any desire to leave, and I don't blame them. They just won the Stanley Cup, they get to live in Florida, they probably have a great lifestyle, they're all great friends. Why would you want to leave? But they're likely going to be in a position where they might not have any choice but to trade one of these RFAs. I've said this before. It's a matter of time before teams really start calling them to really ramp up trade talk around either Cirelli or Sergachev. There's no room to trade them. I mean, they've been trying feverishly to trade Tyler Johnson with no options in sight. I mean, you would think, though, there's a lot of talk around Johnson and how they'll get it to go is that they'll talk to a team who can take him on with some kind of added bonus as a sweetener and then make Johnson available to the Seattle Kraken in the expansion draft with the hopes that Seattle would take him on for the last couple of years of his contract. But of course, no guarantees that happens either. The team taking him on might have to then talk to Seattle and try to entice them to take Johnson and to give something extra up to them. So we'll see what happens in Tampa, but again, these RFAs are prime targets for offer sheets. These teams are just very lucky that there's not very many teams available who has the necessary space and ability to make these offer sheets, because at the end of the day, they would be prime picking here for that right opportunity like we saw last year with Sebastian Aho getting offer sheeted by Montreal. So we'll see what happens in Tampa. But at this point, there's still a big logjam there. Nobody wants to leave. They've all got no trade clauses. So you can't help but wonder if Cirelli or Sergachev might not have any choice but to be traded, since they don't have any other options, at least at this point. Now, the other team we want to talk about today is the Boston Bruins. They're another team who is still talking to Jake DeBrusk about a new contract. And Jake DeBrusk, again, like some of these other guys, do not have arbitration rights. So these cases could drag on for some time before they get a contract done. And it's believed that Boston is also scouring the UFA market as well as the trade market, with DeBrusk's name coming up substantially here. So the Bruins are looking to replace, if they can, or add some extra depth to their blue line. I mean, they lost Torrey Krug. They don't know that Chera's coming back. As I talked about before, there's still a lot of talk about Chera maybe being an option for Tampa. But again, I'm going to dismiss that possibility for right now, because I don't see how Tampa could do it. Even if Chera takes a league minimum contract, how are they going to pay him and squeeze him in? I don't see how it's quite possible. I mean, the other thing with Tampa, too, just go back to them for a second here, is they don't have anybody who they can look like they can really put on long-term injury reserve to free up some space either. So I think they're kind of in a screwed situation. I don't know how they're going to get themselves out of it. So we'll see. But when it comes to Boston, like I said, they're obviously talking about trading Jake DeBrusk. They're talking about adding through the UFA market. So when you're looking at defensemen on the UFA market, there's not a lot out there anymore, unless they're looking at maybe a Sami Vatanen, perhaps. I mean, they could look to add a forward like a Granlund or a Hoffman. There's been talk that they're in on Hoffman. They're one of the teams making offers to him, but they're lowballing him right now. So to me, the Bruins' issue a lot has been secondary scoring, which could be a bigger problem for the coming season, given the fact that David Pastrnak is very well likely going to be missing part of the year. Marchand could as well, but many believe so far that he'll likely be there for the start of the year. So given all that, I can't help but wonder if they're going to use Jake DeBrusk to bring in a defenseman if they can. I mean, obviously, you're looking around the league at other RFAs. You can't help but wonder if maybe some of the RFAs could even be swapped for each other or something, because there's just a major clog here between the trade market and the RFA market without arbitration, because these guys are some pretty solid players needing big raises, and there's just no space to do it. So are we going to see some big RFAs either offer sheeted or traded, like Matthew Barzal, Anthony Cirelli, Mikhail Sergachev, etc.? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments, and we'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing and turning on your notifications so you don't miss any future content, and give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. I'd appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.